She walked into her own engagement party and found her fiancé's hand on her sister's body in the dark. In that instant, her heart did not break. It went cold. The narrator sees everything: the humiliation, the silence, the grief she refuses to show. But what makes this night unforgettable is not the betrayal. It is what she does next. Instead of collapsing, she turns to the coldest man in the room, her fiancé's older brother, and asks him one question that leaves an entire family breathless. Will you marry me instead?
Heels. Case file opened on subject Vance. Initial presentation. Attending a pre-nuptial celebration with baseline expectations of social conformity. Heels. The inciting incident was visual confirmation of her fiancé's infidelity with her biological sister. Note the proximity and familiarity of the subject's physical contact, suggesting a long-term pattern. Heels. The subject's engagement ring is noted as a precipitating trigger for cognitive dissonance. The expected emotional response, distress, verbal outburst, did not manifest. Instead, the subject initiated a high-risk transference of attachment. Heels. Approaching the perceived alpha male of the social group, her fiancé's elder brother, with a proposal of marriage. Some individuals decompensate under pressure. Others attempt to seize control. The following report details the escalation. Heels. We request you submit your observational data for cross-referencing. Heels. The environment, the Grand Laurier Ballroom, was a stage set for a display of social power. Ivory, crystal, cream, gold, all signifiers of status. Subject Vance exhibited clear signs of depersonalization near the entrance. Heels. Adjusting her attire repetitively, a common self-soothing behavior. The garment, pale green silk, was selected for social camouflage, appropriate yet unremarkable. She reported feeling a sense of disassociation, as if inhabiting an unfamiliar body. Heels. The subject's mother provided unsolicited physical contact and verbal reinforcement of the union's social value, stating, "Adrian will be so pleased." This confirms the external pressures fueling the subject's compliance. Heels. The original engagement was a public spectacle, a charity gala, making refusal a high-cost social action. Heels. The pairing had been established for 2 years, a duration deemed socially appropriate. The logic was transactional. Her profession, architecture, complemented his real estate development. Familial approval was secured on both sides. Heels. The subject's emotional state, her happiness, was never entered into the equation. The subject's younger sister, Cleo, presented with behaviors consistent with histrionic personality traits. Heels. Arriving early and already under the influence of alcohol. Her physical radiance is a key tool in her social interactions. The mother's statement, "You know how important tonight is for the Morels," underscores the true nature of the event. Heels. A public formalization of an alliance between the Morel assets and the Vance legacy, a valuable architectural prestige. Heels. The subject's father was a significant figure, designing numerous luxury properties. Vance now represents that legacy, a commodity desired by the Morel family. Heels. The subject displayed full awareness of this transactional basis from the outset, but lacked the motivation to withdraw. Her stated need to find a restroom was a pretext to temporarily escape the mounting social pressure. The mother's warning, Heels. "Don't be long," functioned as a reminder of her role. The subject moved through the ballroom, past markers of extreme wealth, calligraphed place cards, expensive hors d'oeuvres. The entire event, orchestrated by Adrian's mother, Heels, proceeded without the subject's genuine input, reinforcing her role as a passive participant. The hallway became the locus of the traumatic event. Heels. Upon rounding a corner, she observed her fiancé, Adrian, and her sister, Cleo. Initial cognitive processing appeared fragmented, a defense mechanism against overwhelming psychological trauma. Key indicators were noted. Heels. Adrian's hand placement on Cleo's waist, Cleo's head posture, and the complete lack of interpersonal space between them. His tactile exploration of her hip was not accidental. It was intimate and practiced. Heels. The subject remained motionless 15 feet away, a passive observer to a pattern of established betrayal. Cleo's vocalization, a soft, low-volume laugh followed by "we can't." Heels. "Not here," confirmed both the ongoing nature of the affair and the immediate risk of discovery. Heels. Adrian's response, "Then where?" was delivered with a vocal tone, low and rough, that the subject had never previously heard, indicating a hidden facet of his personality. Upon their detection, Heels, the pair exhibited a startled response and separated abruptly. Cleo's complexion lost color, a physiological sign of shock, while Adrian defaulted to a neutral facial expression, a mask he reportedly utilized in business negotiations. Deals. His verbal explanation, Cleo was feeling unwell, is a classic form of immediate fabrication. Cleo colluded with this narrative, feigning a headache. Aravance's internal assessment of her sister is noted. 23 years of age, feels financially dependent, with a history of entitled, impulsive behavior. Feels. How long? The subject's vocalization was unexpectedly steady, indicating a high degree of emotional regulation. Cleo feigned ignorance before Aravance articulated the direct accusation. How long have you been sleeping with my fiancé? Feels. Adrian attempted to intervene with a classic denial. Ira, you're misunderstanding. The subject halted him with a nonverbal gesture, a raised hand asserting sudden dominance. Cleo's response, does it matter? Feels, reveals a profound lack of empathy. For Aravance, the primary emotional state identified was not heartbreak, but exhaustion, a symptom of prolonged emotional suppression. Her declaration, I'm calling off the engagement, feels, was delivered as a statement of fact, not a threat. Adrian's composure fractured, revealing panic, feels. His immediate reaction was to bargain. Wait, let's talk about this. He attempted to frame the situation as a solvable problem. Aravance correctly identified there was nothing to negotiate. When he attempted to re-establish physical contact, feels, she retreated, maintaining a boundary. His attempt to invalidate her feelings, you're upset, I understand, was followed by a shift to coercive control, focusing on the public consequences. The subject's retort, feels, you should have thought about that before you slept with my sister, assigned appropriate responsibility. His focus remained on quiet management and the avoidance of a disaster, a term he defined by public perception, not private betrayal. Feels. The term we triggered a moment of clarity for the subject, recognizing her exclusion from the partnership. Feels. The subject stated her intention was not to create a scene, but simply to withdraw. She then executed a controlled retreat down the hallway. Her hands exhibited tremors, a physiological manifestation of stress, but her gait was even. Feels. She ignored the escalating conflict behind her. Back in the ballroom, now filled with guests, the subject scanned the crowd. Her focus bypassed her mother, landing instead on Lucien Morel. He is identified as Adrian's older brother, feels, a figure of familial power. His presentation is a study in contrasts to his brother. Where Adrian projects warmth, Lucien projects cold control. His posture and gaze are hypervigilant, cataloging the room for threats. Feels. Lucien is taller and physically larger than his brother, with facial features described as sharp and unwelcoming. Other individuals instinctively grant him a wide berth. The subject's prior interactions with him were limited to 2 brief, feels, perfunctory encounters. He is the operator of the family's multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, with a reputation for ruthlessness. His own family refers to him as the Ice King and difficult. Aravance had no established rapport with him, feels. She moved toward him with clear intent. He registered her approach at a distance of 10 feet, his gaze shifting to her without any discernible change in expression, maintaining a cool, analytical assessment. Feels. Lucien. She addressed him directly, stopping within his personal space. He acknowledged her by name, his voice slow and clipped, and offered the socially required congratulations. Feels. This reference to the now-defunct engagement served as an ironic counterpoint. I need to ask you something, she stated. One of his eyebrows rose, a minimal but significant facial cue. Now? Yes, he placed his drink on the bar, feels, signaling his full attention. The subject then took a breath, acknowledging the irrationality of her impending action, and proceeded regardless. Will you marry me? The query was met with silence. Lucien's expression was one of profound disbelief, feels. Excuse me, I'm serious, she confirmed, her voice level despite a rapid heart rate. I want you to marry me instead of Adrian. Is this a joke? Do I look like I'm joking? He conducted a brief but intense visual analysis of her face. Feels. What he observed in her expression prompted a subtle shift in his own. What happened? He inquired. She initially deflected. That doesn't matter. He correctly countered. Feels. It does if you're asking me to marry you in the middle of your engagement party to my brother. A valid point. Aravance scanned their surroundings. Feels. Noting the lack of immediate observation, but recognizing the limited time before their interaction would draw attention. She delivered the new intelligence quietly and directly. Adrienne's having an affair with my sister, feels. I just caught them together. I'm calling off the engagement. Lucien's expression became entirely neutral, a mask of controlled processing. I see, she continued, outlining the inevitable social fallout, the public humiliation for both families. Feels. Then she met his gaze. Feels. Or we give them a different story. He correctly identified her motive. You want to use me as a replacement. She reframed it as a mutually beneficial transaction. His cynical observation, marriage isn't a business transaction, Feels, was met with a clinical counter-analysis. You're 34 years old. Your mother has been pushing you to settle down for years. She then presented her own value proposition. I'm an architect with a reputation good enough to be useful, Feels, and I'm standing right here, willing to make this easy for you. He questioned the word easy, easier than the alternative, she clarified. She laid out the consequences of her departure, the collapse of the event, the scandal attaching to his family, Feels, and the public emasculation of his brother. Her delivery was calm and factual, Feels. The alternative presented is a joint public declaration, a strategic narrative manipulation, total seriousness. Subject Lucian processes the proposal, his gaze an unwavering analytical tool. Her statement, "You don't even know me," Feels, is dismissed with a factual observation. "I know you're not sleeping with my sister." A micro-expression, quickly suppressed his query, "What makes you think I'd agree to this?" is a test. She diagnoses him as practical, emotionally detached, and, Feels, crucially, equally trapped by circumstance, a flicker of response. His denial, "You don't know anything about what I want," is a standard defense mechanism, followed by a challenge for her to substantiate her claim. Feels. A weighted silence ensues, a tactical pause against the backdrop of ambient social noise. Lucian verbalizes the logistical impediment, his sibling, Adrian. He anticipates difficulty, a predictable complication, Feels. His focus then shifts to her motivations. "What do you get out of this?" he inquires. This is not about empathy, it's a risk assessment. Era's response is a textbook case of reframing trauma, Feels. She seeks to transform her social identity from the jilted woman into the woman who exercised superior judgment. He almost smiles, an acknowledgement of a shared pathology, cold calculation, Feels. She correctly identifies this as a trait he values. The smile manifests, fleeting but authentic. All right. The subject's breath hitches, a physiological response to the sudden power shift. All right, I'll marry you, Feels. Lucian reasserts control immediately, outlining his terms. This will not be a clandestine affair or a fabricated romance. His protocol demands absolute transparency, a public announcement, and shared management of the consequences, Feels. The offer is final, non-negotiable. He is testing for impulsivity. She confirms her resolve. His invitation, "Then let's go ruin my brother's night," reframes the act as strategic sabotage. She accepts his arm, completing the pact, Feels. Their entrance into the ballroom initially goes unregistered, an anomaly in the social fabric. Then recognition propagates through the crowd in a cascading wave of whispers. Lucian Morel and Era Vance. A new pairing. Era's mother intercepts them, Feels, her expression a mask of social anxiety. "Era, sweetheart, where have you been?" Era signals a deviation from the social script. There's been a change of plans. Lucian's hand covers hers, a gesture of ownership. He clarifies the nature of the change, Feels. "The kind where I'm stealing your daughter from my brother." Her mother's laughter is a sign of cognitive dissonance, an inability to process the new data, Feels. "Ira and I are engaged," Lucian announces, specifying the time frame as of 5 minutes ago. The mother displays a classic shock response, her face losing all color. That's not funny, denial. The ambient conversation ceases abruptly, Feels. The collective attention of 200 individuals focuses on them. Adrian appears, displaying physiological signs of rage. "What the hell are you doing?" His question is met with Lucian's calm reply, answering a proposal. He deflects, Feels, indicating Era as the instigator. "Your ex-fiancé made me a better offer." Adrian's expression toward Era is one of complete disorientation. He attempts to re-establish control by grabbing her arm, Feels. Lucian's reaction is instantaneous, a display of proprietary aggression. Before the action can be fully processed, he has Adrian's wrist in a grip that induces a pain response, turning Adrian's face white. The command, "Don't touch her," Feels, is delivered quietly, maximizing its threat. Adrian's claim of ownership is clinically refuted. Not anymore. Cleo intervenes, her effect distressed, Feels. She attempts to invalidate Era's decision by labeling it an emotional overreaction. "You're upset." Era turns this back, exposing the core trauma, the affair, the betrayal, the humiliation of being a secondary option. Cleo is rendered speechless, Feels. The matriarch, Margot Morel, moves through the crowd with an air of absolute authority. She is physically small, but her presence dominates the space. Her voice is sharp, weaponized. Lucian, what is the meaning of this? Feels. His response is a flat statement of fact, devoid of emotion. Ira and I are engaged. He feigns innocence, a classic narcissistic tactic. I thought you'd be pleased. You've been asking me to settle down for years. Her warning, don't be clever with me, feels, is ignored. She correctly identifies the event as his brother's. He calmly corrects the tense, was his engagement party. A declaration of a paradigm shift, feels. Margot perceives this as an attack on the family's social standing. She redirects her interrogation to Era, suspecting a revenge plot. Era confirms the affair as the direct catalyst, a gasp from the onlookers, feels. The whispers escalate into a contagion of social judgment. Margot's face becomes a rigid mask. She attempts to move the conflict to a private setting. Lucian refuses. There's nothing to discuss. Era and I are getting married, feels. He presents it as an unalterable fact, a power play that removes her agency. Her hand rises, an aborted gesture of physical violence, feels. She suppresses the impulse, visibly wrestling for control. Fine. Do what you want, you always do. This is both capitulation and condemnation. She retreats, her posture rigid. The room dissolves into a chaotic mess of speculation and scandal, feels. Era remains at the epicenter, anchored by Lucian's physical presence, reporting a feeling of detached calm. The destruction of her social life has paradoxically resulted in a sense of liberation. Adrian, still processing the event, feels, calls her action a mistake. No, she counters, I'm fixing one. Lucian then extracts her from the environment, the crowd parting for them in a state of collective shock. Feels. Ira observes Cleo's face, pale, tear-streaked. She registers the sister's distress with satisfaction. A transfer of pain outside a vehicle is prepared, evidence of Lucian's foresight. Inside the car, the external chaos is muffled, feels. Era begins to exhibit physiological signs of an adrenaline crash. Her hands tremble. Lucian observes her, his expression unreadable. That was quite a performance, he notes. She confirms her intent was genuine. He already knew, feels. She questions his motives for agreeing. He confirms her initial diagnosis was correct, feels. Why did he agree? He lists his motives clinically: aversion to the environment, rejection of the role of the good son, disgust at his brother's behavior. She correctly labels it revenge. He relabels it strategy, feels. A method to impose consequences on his brother, who has historically avoided them. He then redirects the inquiry back to her. And me? What do I get out of this? Her response is telling. She does not want a person or a conventional marriage, feels. She desires significance. I want to matter, she states, expressing a deep-seated frustration with being overlooked, feels. I see you, he says. The statement, while simple, seems to trigger an emotional response in her. She immediately pivots to logistics, establishing ground rules to manage the intimacy of the arrangement. A business contract, not a romance, feels. Separate lives, complete honesty, no more lies, no more secrets. He agrees to these terms. The vehicle arrives at one of the Morel properties, a high-status location, Lucian's building. He informs her that her belongings will be relocated tomorrow. Feels. This is a rapid escalation of commitment. Feels. He is clear. This is a merger, not a fairy tale. She acknowledges the term, a merger, yet she reports a sense of hollowness, a dissonance between the logical arrangement and an unfulfilled emotional expectation. Inside, the private elevator ascends to the penthouse. The living space is a reflection of his personality, expansive, controlled, and emotionally sterile. It is a statement of power and precision, feels. This is moving very fast, Era observes. He reminds her that she initiated this accelerated timeline with her public proposal, a fair point. The apartment itself is less a home than an architectural display dominated by views of the city, feels. He directs her to the guest quarters, establishing physical and emotional distance by designating the master suite for himself. Separate bedrooms. She admits to a sense of disappointment, despite this being consistent with their agreement, feels. He pours whiskey, a social lubricant. The toast formalizes their pact to strategic alliances, feels. Subject Era and the associate Lucian engage in a ritualistic gesture, clinking their glasses. A toast to superior decision-making. Consumption of the alcohol occurs in silence, feels. The subject's communication device activates repeatedly. A series of 23 notifications are noted from her mother, an individual named Cleo, another named Adrian, and peers inquiring about the recent public event, feels. The subject deactivates the device. He observes that the calls will persist. She dismisses the concern. He exhibits a smile, noted as the first genuine expression observed. small but authentic, feels. He assesses her as possessing greater resilience than her appearance suggests. Her response is a statement of necessity. I have to be. This is followed by her acknowledgement of the facts, feels. An agreement to marry a male subject with whom she has minimal familiarity. He offers a solution-oriented statement. We'll fix that. She inquires as to the methodology. He defers. Lucian concludes his beverage. Feels. He designates the current evening for rest, postponing any management of the consequences until the following day. The subject concurs, displaying sudden, profound fatigue. As she departs for the guest quarters, Lucian addresses her again. Feels. The subject turns. He offers validation for her actions, stating she did the correct thing before he withdraws. He questions her own certainty. Her reply indicates a state of cognitive confusion. His response, "You will," is ambiguous, feels, interpretable as either reassurance or a threat. The subject selects the guest room most distant from the primary suite, secures the door, and positions herself on the bed. The environment is noted as aesthetically pleasing but impersonal, feels. Akin to a luxury hotel, she removes her footwear and hair restraints, reclining fully clothed. The subject is processing recent events, entering a marital contract with Lucian Morel, terminating her prior engagement, feels, and publicly exposing her sister's infidelity before a large social gathering. A lack of regret is noted. The subject enters a state of sleep, still attired in her formal dress, with the diamond ring from Adrian remaining on her finger, feels. Its removal is postponed until the following day, feels. The immediate objective for the night was survival. This was deemed sufficient. The subject awakens to unfamiliar visual stimuli, sunlight from a new source, and the disorienting recognition of being in the previous day's attire. A brief, feels, 3-second period of amnesia is observed before total recall of the preceding trauma occurs. Key memories surface. The sibling antagonist, Adrian, in physical contact with Cleo. The shocked expressions of the social gathering, feels. Lucian's quiet proposal of a strategic alliance through marriage. She assumes a seated position, presenting with disheveled hair and smudged cosmetics. The deactivated phone remains on the nightstand, its engagement actively avoided, feels. The residence is silent. Subject Era proceeds barefoot down a hallway, guided by olfactory cues of coffee. The kitchen is described with stark, modern aesthetics. Lucian is present, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with rolled sleeves, feels engaged with a tablet device, feels. He acknowledges her entry, his gaze performing a quick observational scan of her disheveled state. His expression remains neutral, lacking any discernible judgment. He offers coffee. She accepts, and he serves it black, feels, stating ignorance of her preferences. This is deemed acceptable. The subject grips the mug, a self-soothing gesture. She inquires about the time. It is nearly 10 o'clock. She has been unconscious for 12 hours, an unusually long duration for her, feels. Lucian reports that her phone has been ringing and that building security has relayed a message. Her mother is in the lobby, demanding access. The subject's reaction is one of weary resignation. Perfect. She requests he deny her presence, feels. He confirms this action has already been taken. He sets his device aside. The mother is now threatening law enforcement involvement. On what grounds? The subject is a legal adult, feels. The associate explains the mother's perception, that he has abducted the subject. Ira exhibits a near law, a reaction to the absurdity. The irony is noted. She was coerced into the marriage pact, yet he is cast as the perpetrator, feels. His response is clinical. People see what they want to see. Lucian leans against the counter, shifting to tactical matters. The media has already disseminated the story. Paparazzi are stationed outside. This is an expected outcome, feels. The Morel family's internal conflict is a high-value narrative for the press, containing elements of wealth, betrayal, and sibling rivalry. He queries her desired course of action. Ira suggests inaction. He confirms nothing, feels. The strategy is to starve the news cycle by refusing to provide further stimuli. He allows for an alternative, should she wish to release an official statement, feels. She responds with a sarcastic formulation of a potential statement, exposing the affair as the catalyst for her upgraded marital arrangement. Lucian acknowledges its potential impact. Era consumes her coffee described as strong and bitter, feels. She expresses a need to return to her residence to retrieve personal effects. He counters by offering to dispatch an agent. She insists on her own agency in packing. He reveals that her mother is also present at her own building's lobby, feels. Lucian's effect remains flat. He reiterates his capacity to resolve such logistical issues through his personnel. The plan: provide a key, and her belongings will be relocated by evening. Heels. The casual display of significant wealth and resources is a point of note for her. Of course, he has staff to handle such things. She objects to having unknown individuals handling her possessions. Heels. His solution is immediate. She is to create a list, providing precise instructions for his agents. The subject shows a desire to argue but concedes to his logic. Returning to her residence would precipitate a confrontation with her mother and Cleo, Heels, and likely Adrian. She is not prepared for that conflict. Fine, she agrees, but identifies an immediate need for a change of clothes. Lucian utilizes his phone, typing a brief message. The problem is solved. Heels. A delivery of clothing options will arrive within the hour. She questions if he has a personal shopper on retainer. He clarifies, I have assistants who know how to solve problems quickly. The phone is put away. Heels. He pivots to the next logistical necessity, the wedding. The reality of the pact solidifies. She asks for the most rapid timeline possible. Legally, a 3-day waiting period for a license is required, after which the ceremony can be immediate. Heels. He tilts his head, assessing. Heels. He anticipates his mother will require a public demonstration, a statement. Delaying the event will increase the probability of her interference. Therefore, a rapid execution is optimal. This week, the subject experiences a visceral, anxious reaction. Heels. The proposition, now verbalized, becomes concrete in a way it had not been previously. Within the week, she will be legally bound to a man with whom she has interacted on perhaps 10 prior occasions. She inquires about the nature of the ceremony. Heels. His proposal is for a small private event, signatures and witnesses only. His gaze is steady, assessing her reaction. He leaves the final decision to her. Her objective is clear. Heels. Finalize the arrangement before external persuasion can alter her decision. A subtle change is observed in his eyes, possibly approval. He states he will make the arrangements. Era retrieves her own tablet. Heels. She accesses her calendar, which is filled with professional obligations. Meetings, site visits, client presentations, a design review scheduled for Thursday. She presents this as an obstacle. He states he has his own work. Heels. She asserts her inability to cancel her commitments. He clarifies that he is not asking her to. Lucian refills his coffee. We're both professionals. We'll figure it out. An intercom buzzes. He answers, speaks briefly, and terminates the call. Heels. He announces the arrival of her sister. The subject's immediate response is to demand her removal. He reports that the sister is exhibiting emotional distress in the lobby, causing discomfort for the security staff. Era closes her eyes. Heels, a gesture of fatigue. The sister's use of tears as a manipulative tool is a known pattern. Era agrees to a confrontation, but not within his private residence. Downstairs, he asks if she is certain. She affirms her boundary. Heels. The sister will not be granted access to his apartment. Heels. Lucian nods, stating he will accompany her. His presence is not required, she says. He insists. They descend in the elevator in silence. The subject is acutely self-aware of her disheveled appearance. It is predicted that Cleo, by contrast, Heels, will be doors open to the lobby. The door is seated on a bench, her face displaying signs of recent crying, a tissue in hand. Her attire, jeans and oversized sweater, Heels. A messy bun is identified by the subject as a calculated performance of casual distress, likely requiring 45 minutes of preparation. She rises upon seeing Era, expressing relief. She claims to have been trying to make contact all night. Heels. Era's response is blunt. What do you want, Cleo? The sister flinches, stating a desire to explain. Era dismisses this, stating there is nothing to explain. The visual evidence was conclusive. Cleo insists it is not what it appears to be. Heels. The subject produces a sharp, humorless laugh. Really? She vocalizes her perception of the event, her fiancé with his hand on Cleo's rear. She questions which part of that was a misunderstanding. Cleo produces fresh tears, Heels, claiming it was never her intention for this to happen. She describes the affair's progression as slow and insidious. Era demands a timeline. How long has she been sexually involved with Adrian? Cleo looks at the floor. 6 months. 6 months. Heels. Half a year. This period coincides with Era's wedding planning, a time of presumed trust and intimacy with Adrian. You're unbelievable, Era states quietly. Cleo agrees and offers an apology. Era refutes the sincerity of the apology, Heels, diagnosing it instead as regret at being discovered. Cleo objects, labeling the assessment as unfair, fair. Heels. Era advances her position. Lucian remains a passive observer, though his presence is felt. You want to talk about fair? The subject proceeds to list a history of transgressions, a pattern of Cleo taking what she wanted: clothing, friends, deals, even Era's college fund after she failed out of school. The subject states she permitted these actions out of a sense of familial obligation. But this instance is categorized as different. Cleo's voice cracks as she professes love for Adrian. Feels. She claims the feelings are mutual and uncontrollable, despite the poor timing. Era halts the narrative with a hand gesture. Stop. She forbids Cleo from romanticizing the behavior. You had an affair. He cheated. Those are the facts. Heals. Cleo's tears cease, replaced by a hardened affect. She pivots, attacking Era's own actions. Heals. She accuses Era of marrying Lucian out of spite, labeling the act sick. Era refutes this, stating, I'm marrying Lucian because I choose to. Cleo points out her lack of familiarity with him. Era counters that she apparently did not know Adrian either. Heals. Cleo's expression contorts. She predicts this will destroy their mother. The subject's response is dismissive. Mops will survive. She reports that their mother is already vocalizing her own social humiliation. Era's retort is sharp. Heals. Then their mother should have raised a daughter who did not engage in sexual activity with her sister's fiancé. The verbal blow lands. Cleo recoils, her face paling. She restates her intention was to apologize and repair the damage. Heals. Era declares the situation irreparable. So that's it, Cleo says. You're just cutting me out of your life. Era performs a final clinical assessment of her sister, 23 years old, still defaulting to a victim archetype. Heals. Still operating under the assumption that her charm and performative emotion will absolve her. I'm not cutting you out. Era clarifies. I'm just done protecting you from consequences. She pivots and returns to the elevator. Lucian follows. Heals. Behind them, Cleo's calls become desperate. Era does not react. The doors close. That went well, Lucian comments dryly. The subject predicts Cleo will recover quickly. She always does. Era leans against the elevator wall. Heals, exhibiting renewed signs of exhaustion. She predicts Cleo will find a new subject to manipulate, and within 6 months, the memory of this conflict will be insignificant to her. And her mother? Heals. Her mother will assign blame to Era for causing public embarrassment to the family. Heals. Subject Era is already engaging in anticipatory blame shifting, constructing a narrative in which she is the sole architect of her familial conflict. The elevator doors open to the penthouse. She moves to the windows, observing the city. Heals. From this vantage point, the chaos of street level is sanitized, an illusion of order. Lucian asks from behind her, do you regret it? A classic probing question. Which part? Any of it. The subject considers this. Feels. Does she regret the impulsive proposal, the public demolition of her engagement? Probable. But she does not regret severing the tie to Adrian. She states, I don't regret leaving. I regret not seeing it sooner. He counters. Feels. You can't blame yourself for trusting people. Why not? I was naive. Here he reframes her self-assessed weakness. You were loyal. There's a difference. A subtle but powerful psychological manipulation. Feels. She turns her focus to him. He has positioned himself in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, hands pocketed, observing her with a steady, unreadable gaze. What about you? Era asks. Do you regret agreeing to this? Feels. His response is a textbook evasion designed to maintain control. I don't make decisions I regret. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. The intercom buzzes, an external stimulus. This time, it's a personal shopper. A woman in her 50s, Feels, exuding professional efficiency, arrives with 3 garment bags. She establishes a base room presenting options, all in Era's precise size. How did you know my measurements? Era later asks Lucian. I didn't. Feels. I gave them your height and build. She figured it out. His world operates on this principle. Problems are preemptively solved, reinforcing his image as an omnipotent provider. Feels. Era showers and changes into apparel that likely exceeds her previous budget for rent. When she reemerges, Lucian is on a call, speaking rapid French. He switches to English upon seeing her. I'll call you back. He disconnects. Feels. My lawyers want to meet with you. Go over the partnership agreement. When? This afternoon, if you're available. I have a site meeting at 3 o'clock. Cancel it. I'm not canceling my work because... Era, he interrupts. Feels, his tone quiet but laced with steel. The next 48 hours are going to be chaos. Feels. Press, family, legal documents. If you want this marriage to happen on your terms, you'll need to handle the groundwork now. Your site meeting can wait. He is correct. His logic is irrefutable, which she resents. Fine, she concedes. That afternoon, Feels. The legal team arrives at 2. Three individuals in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios. They occupy Lucian's dining room, laying out contracts like strategic maps for a campaign. The lead counsel, a woman named Caroline with sharp eyes, guides Era through the agreement. This is less a prenuptial document and more a corporate merger, asset protection, financial partitions, dissolution protocols. This clause here, Caroline indicates a paragraph on page 6. It stipulates separate finances. All assets acquired before and during the marriage remain individual property unless explicitly transferred. So if we divorce, we each walk away with what we brought. Era clarifies. Essentially, yes. And if one of us dies, there's a provision for that. Standard inheritance terms. Nothing passes automatically unless designated in a separate will. It is clinical, bloodless, exactly what Era requested. This raises the question, why does the fulfillment of her own terms produce a feeling of emptiness? What about business overlap? Era asks. I'm an architect. Lucian's company develops properties. If I work on a Morel project, you bill at your standard rate. Caroline explains, same as any other client. The marriage doesn't change professional relationships. And if the marriage ends, I don't lose access to projects I'm contracted for. Correct. Business and personal are separate entities. Lucian, who has been observing, now leans forward. Are you concerned about that? He asks Era directly. Losing work. I'm concerned about being dependent on you. You won't be. This agreement protects both of us. He then looks at Caroline, a public display of magnanimity. Make sure the language is clear. Era's professional reputation and client relationships are untouchable, regardless of what happens between us personally. Caroline makes a note. I'll have the revision ready by tomorrow. They proceed through another 20 pages. By the conclusion, the subject is experiencing cognitive overload from the sheer volume of clauses. She signs and initials as directed. The act of legally binding herself to a man known for less than 24 hours feels dissociated, surreal. After the lawyers of Papart, Luz pours 2 glasses of wine. You okay? He asks. I just signed a contract that reads like a business acquisition. That's what this is. I know. Era sips the wine. It is predictably excellent. It's strange. Marriage is supposed to be about love, building a life together. This feels like we're preparing for a divorce before we've even gotten married. We're being realistic. Is that what you call it? Lucian sits opposite her. You want honesty? I've seen what happens when people marry for love. My parents did that. They fought for 30 years before my father finally died. He pathologizes romantic love, using Adrian as another case study. He chases feelings, and now his reputation is destroyed. So you don't believe in love. I believe in compatibility, respect, shared goals. He meets her gaze. I think those last longer than butterflies and passion. That's depressing. It's practical. You sound like me. A small near smile from him. Maybe that's why this works. Era's phone, recharged, begins to vibrate incessantly, stimuli from her former life. She ignores it. Messages from her mother, her sister Cleo, colleagues and reporters. You should probably make a statement, Lucian advises. At work, at least. Let people know you're still functioning. What do I say? The truth. You've ended one engagement and started another. Your professional life continues as normal. Right. As normal. The statement itself is an act of cognitive dissonance. Era composes a brief, professional email to her workplace, confirming her project schedules remain intact while declining to discuss personal matters. She transmits the message before doubt can intervene. The mover's finished, Lucian notes from his phone. Your things are in the second guest room. That was fast. I told them to prioritize it. Era proceeds down the hall. The room is transformed. Her belongings, clothes, books, her desk are arranged within the space. They have even included her inexpensive coffee maker from college. The object looks jarringly out of place, a relic from a former identity. Her possessions do not belong in this sterile environment. She does not belong here. We can rearrange however you want, Lucian says from the doorway. It's fine. Era turns. He is observing her with that same careful expression, as if attempting to decipher a foreign text. This is temporary, he says. The weirdness, the adjustment. It won't always feel this wrong. You don't know that. I do. Because we're both practical people, and practical people adapt. A logical assertion designed to quell her emotional response. That night, they consume a meal together, takeout, eaten at the kitchen island. The conversation is curated, focused on neutral, work-related topics. It resembles an initial courtship ritual between two individuals who have already been legally bound, a profoundly disorienting experience. Feels. I have a meeting tomorrow morning, Lucian states. Development deal in Midtown. I'll be gone until noon. I have a client review at 10. We should coordinate schedules, figure out when we need to appear together. Right. Appearances. Feels. The performance aspect of their union must now be managed. The wedding, Era says. When? Exactly. Friday, 2 p.m. City Hall. Then a small reception here if you want. Will your mother be there? I haven't asked her yet. Feels. That should be a fun conversation. A twitch at his mouth. She'll come. She won't be happy, but she'll come. What about my family? Do you want them there? Era recalls her mother's accusatory tone. Cleo's distress. No. Feels. Then they won't be invited. For him, the process is simple. Define a boundary, enforce it, and proceed. A capability Era seemingly lacks. Later, in her assigned bed, the subject stares at the ceiling, attempting to process the rapid sequence of events. Feels. In 3 days, she will be married. Her identity, Aravance, will be subsumed into Morel. The thought, which should induce panic, instead brings a strange sense of calm, a classic symptom of emotional resignation. Friday arrives with startling speed. Feels. She wears a cream dress, Lucian a dark suit. They meet at City Hall with his chosen witnesses. The ceremony is a legal formality lasting 11 minutes. Feels. They affirm their consent. They sign the documents. The transaction is complete. Lucienne performs a kiss for the benefit of the officiant. The physical contact is brief, professional, and devoid of emotional content. Congratulations, Caroline says. Feels. A single photograph is taken for the license, a document of the acquisition. The two subjects stand side by side, his hand on her waist, both staring at the camera with neutral expressions. They present as strangers. They are. That's it? Feels. Era says as they exit the building. That's it. I thought it would feel different. Did you want it to? In truth, the subject's expectations are no longer clear, even to herself. They return to the apartment. Feels. The union was not marked by ceremony or reception. Both subjects, Lucian and Era, immediately reverted to their professional duties. Their first afternoon as a married couple was spent in isolation. Feels. Functioning not as partners but as cohabitants bound by a recent agreement. That evening, a communication from Era's maternal figure was received and subsequently ignored. The recorded message conveyed profound familial distress. Feels. Focusing on a sibling, Cleo. Note the subject's reaction, immediate deletion of the stimulus. This demonstrates a conscious severing of prior emotional attachments, a necessary psychological defense to fortify herself within the new arrangement. Feels. The following Monday, she resumed her professional schedule. Feels. Interactions within her workplace were characterized by controlled curiosity from colleagues, which she met with guarded, factual responses. She confirmed the marriage, acknowledged its abruptness, and refused further disclosure. Her superior, Feels. Michael, expressed concern over potential professional compromise, specifically regarding the moral development account, a significant client. Era asserted that a functional boundary was established. Feels. Michael's warning that the conflation of personal and professional domains often leads to negative outcomes was noted. The subject was, in fact, relying on this separation. That Wednesday, Lucian initiated a professional crossover, Feels, requesting her architectural assessment of a potential corporate acquisition. Feels. The subject analyzed the blueprints, identifying critical structural weaknesses. She indicated a load-bearing wall, explaining the necessity of significant reinforcement to prevent a catastrophic failure of the second story if it were removed. Feels. Lucian, observing her assessment, inquired about the financial implications. The estimate was $100,000, possibly $150,000. His response was immediate and decisive. He placed a call, Feels, authorizing the budget revision for the Lexington proposal without hesitation. Here we see a display of his core operational style. Rapid assimilation of expert data followed by swift executive action. Feels. He asked for further analysis. She identified 3 additional areas of concern. He processed each point, his questions displaying a keen grasp of the material, and he accepted her recommendations without challenge. Feels. His validation of her work, "This is good work," was followed by a professional offer. "I want you on the project." He framed the offer not as patronage, but as a strategic necessity, requiring a trusted, qualified architect. Feels. This is a classic manipulation tactic of the megalomaniac, framing a personal desire as a logical, unavoidable business decision. Her hesitation stemmed from recognizing this very danger, Professional proximity would foster intimacy, feels, making the artificial arrangement feel authentic, feels. My assistant will forward the contract was her eventual acquiescence. The subsequent 2 weeks established a functional pattern. Their separate lives would intersect for morning coffee and occasional dinners, feels. Conversation was restricted to neutral, work-related subjects. Intentionally avoided were the emotionally charged topics of Adrian, Cleo, or their unconventional cohabitation. The system was stable. Then the subject discovered anomalies, feels. While examining documents for the Lexington project, she noted discrepancies in ownership records and permit chronologies. One entity was listed on the permit, another on the deed. Both were shell corporations with illogical, feels overlapping registration date, feels. Further investigation revealed more inconsistencies, unauthorized changes to access codes and overridden security protocols. An unknown actor was moving systemically through Morel properties, altering records and erasing their trail, feels. The subject alerted Lucian. He appeared within 30 seconds, his demeanor shifting instantly. What's wrong? She presented her findings. His expression hardened into one of cold focus. How many properties? He demanded, feels. She had confirmed at least 6, but the audit was incomplete. His directive was simple. Check everything. They proceeded to work through the night, a shared crisis forcing an immediate, intense collaboration, feels. By 3 a.m., the audit had identified 15 properties exhibiting similar irregularities, all high-value assets with compromised access. Lucian's assessment was immediate and delivered with a quiet lethality, feels. Someone inside the company is doing this. He specified it was an individual with executive-level clearance. When pressed for a name, he deferred, citing the need for verification. Yet he escalated the perceived threat, feels, stating it was not merely about property, but about a move to seize total control. The investigation intensified over the next week, consuming their professional lives. Lucian engaged his head of security, a former federal agent named Marcus, feels, whose interrogative style added to the atmosphere of mounting pressure, feels. Lucian's home office became a command center, surfaces covered with records, logs, and financial data. The subject's aptitude for pattern recognition was instrumental in navigating the complex data. She identified a critical piece of the puzzle, feels, a transfer redirecting rental income from a Tribeca property to an offshore account, concealed within subsidiary paperwork. The total amounted to approximately $2 million over 6 months. Lucian's physical tension was observable. Jaw tight, feels, appearance showing signs of exhaustion. He shared this state with the subject, a key component of trauma bonding through shared adversity. That account became the focus, feels. Marcus inquired if the account's ownership could be traced. The subject explained the difficulty. It was obscured by 3 layers of shell companies, indicating a sophisticated operator with legal expertise. Lucian noted this, feels. Marcus requested a list of all personnel with the requisite clearance. The number was 40. Era, experiencing physical strain from prolonged analysis, posed a crucial question. She moved beyond the simple motive of theft, feels, suggesting the permit and access modifications pointed toward the construction of an infrastructure for a larger hostile takeover, feels. If you wanted to take over the company, she theorized, you'd need control of the properties first. She then directed the inquiry toward Lucian's family succession plan. He confirmed control was split 50-50 between himself and his brother, feels, Adrian. In the event one brother could not serve, full control would transfer to the other. She then cross-referenced the timeline of the modifications, noting the first anomaly appeared 3 years prior, feels, with a significant acceleration 18 months ago. This chronological data point proved to be a critical link, feels. Marcus asked for events corresponding to the 18-month mark. After a significant pause, Lucian disclosed that this was when his brother Adrian began insisting he step back from the company, feels. The narrative was that he was overworked and needed a sabbatical. Era prompted him for other individuals who supported this narrative. He named his mother and Gerald Chen, the chief financial officer, feels. Chen had specifically advised him to delegate operational duties. Marcus immediately flagged Chen's name. As CFO, he possessed the necessary executive access, making him the primary person of interest, feels. The subject proceeded to build a profile on Gerald Chen. Age 52, an 8-year tenure with the company, and an impeccable professional background. He was known for loyalty and a meticulous nature, perhaps pathologically so, feels. ERA uncovered digital communications where Chen included himself on irrelevant email chains and requested access to files outside his departmental purview. He's gathering information, she concluded. Feels. Lucian offered a counter-narrative that he was merely being thorough, but the evidence suggested a pattern of systematic overreach. Feels. The subject discovered Chen had requested access codes to a warehouse in Queens, a property Lucian believed his company owned via the Northside development. ERA's review of the property records showed this was false. Feels. The warehouse belonged to a separate entity, Northside Holdings LLC. Lucian asserted they owned that entity. ERA corrected him. You did. Past tense. She presented an ownership transfer dated 6 months prior, signed over to a different LLC. Feels. The authorization signature was Gerald's. Lucian's physical reaction was visceral. He had authority to do that. A procedural authority, yes, but its application in this context was, as he stated, theft. Feels. This is theft, Lucian stated. Marcus documented the evidence but cautioned against premature action, warning that Chen might be working with others. A premature accusation could compromise the entire investigation. Feels. ERA's question, how much more do you need, was met with a stark reply from Marcus. Enough to bury him. The deep dive continued. By midnight, the data trail, 15 irregular transfers, Feels. 8 unauthorized modifications, pointed unequivocally to Gerald Chen. Yet the subject experienced cognitive dissonance. He's too obvious, she remarked. The trail felt manufactured, too easily discovered for a financial expert. Feels. She posited he was not the architect of the scheme, but rather a diversion, a smokescreen. Feels. Is he being manipulated? No. He's being utilized. That was the revised hypothesis. Observation of the authorization patterns revealed a clear division of labor. Chen's signature provided the access, Feels, but the execution, the technical manipulation of codes and permits, implicated a different skill set spanning property management, legal, and information technology. Lucian initiated a data pull of employee records. The query was simple, Feels. Who possessed clearance across all 3 departments? A vice presidential rank or higher. The query returned a list of 12 names. ERA displayed no recognition for most, but a single entry triggered a response. David Morrison, she noted. Feels. You're VP of Operations, the individual assigned to the Lexington project, correct? 15 years with the company. Feels. He was Adrian's closest friend in college. A nonverbal exchange occurred between ERA and Lucian, a shared acknowledgement of the new data's implication. Contact him, ERA instructed. It is approaching 0100 hours. Contact him. Feels. State a need to review the Lexington financials. Observe his response. Lucian initiated the call on speaker. David answered on the 3rd ring, his voice exhibiting the grogginess consistent with sudden waking. Lucien, is something wrong? Negative. Feels. I require a review of certain budget revisions. Can you present at the office tomorrow morning? A delay. Can this not be handled via email? I prefer an in-person review. A second, more prolonged delay. Affirmative. What time? Feels. 800 hours. I'll be there. The connection was terminated. The 3 subjects stared at the phone. He presents as anxious, Marcus observed. Feels. Or merely irritated by a nocturnal summons, Lucian countered, though his tone lacked conviction. ERA accessed David's personnel file. Subject holds a law degree, prior experience in corporate real estate before his tenure at Moral Industries. Feels. Possesses signature authority on property contracts and has direct system access to permitting databases. And his proximity to Adrian is a known factor, Lucian added quietly. Are you hypothesizing my brother's involvement? Feels. I am currently without a coherent hypothesis. They resolved to construct a controlled experiment. Marcus would conduct overnight surveillance of David's communications. Any data transmission that might suggest he was alerting a co-conspirator. Feels. Lucian would proceed with the morning meeting, disseminating false intelligence about a significant property transaction to test for leakage. Feels. ERA would remain to continue forensic analysis of the documentation, searching for previously missed correlations. My presence is required, she stated. At the meeting. Justification, Lucien inquired. Feels. If David is collaborating with another party, my presence introduces an unpredictable variable. His reaction may be different. I am the factor he cannot account for. Marcus affirmed the logic. She is correct. Feels. Unpredictable elements often precipitate subject error. Agreed, Lucian conceded. But the methodology will be passive. No direct accusations, no confrontation, pure observation. ERA experienced minimal sleep that night. Feels. a state of hyperarousal characterized by obsessive rumination on various scenarios, attempting to assemble the disparate components into a logical framework. Gerald Chen's embezzlement. David Morrison's systemic manipulation. Deals. And Adrian, what was his role? A passive beneficiary, positioned to assume control following Lucien's engineered removal. The construct seemed excessively elaborate, almost pathologically calculated, unless its planning phase had spanned years. Deals. She was preparing coffee at 0500 hours when Lucien entered the kitchen, already attired in a business suit. Insomnia? He queried. Excessive caffeine, and an excess of unanswered questions. He poured a cup for himself. Deals. Leaning against the counter. This had become a ritual for them. Early morning consultations in the kitchen, a preemptive problem-solving session before the external world imposed its demands. It was beginning to register as a baseline state. Deals. May I pose a personal question? Era asked. A high-risk gambit. Do you trust Adrian? Lucien remained silent for a protracted period. Deals. I did, in our youth, before the company became the central axis of our existence. We were bonded then. What was the precipitating event? Our father expired. He left us with joint control, and Adrian was psychologically incapable of managing it. Deals. He craved the authority but rejected the commensurate responsibility. The title, without the labor. Lucien's gaze fixed on his coffee. 10 years I have engaged in compensatory behaviors, providing excuses for him, rectifying his errors. Deals. Insulating the company from his ineptitude. That does not answer my query. No, I do not trust him. I have not for a considerable time. Do you believe he would attempt to seize the company from you? Adrian exhibits ambition. Deals. But it is counteracted by pathological laziness. He would require an external agent to perform the functional tasks. Lucien met her gaze. An agent like David. They arrived at the Morel Industries headquarters at 0730. Deals. The structure was an aggressive statement of modernity, glass and steel occupying an entire city block. Lucien's office, situated on the top floor, was a space defined by panoramic windows and minimalist design. Deals. Era's previous visit had been cursory. This was her first real observation of the environment. You can occupy that chair, Lucien indicated, a seat in the corner, or observe from the conference room through the glass. I will remain here. Deals. Marcus was already positioned in an adjoining room, monitoring surveillance feeds. He signaled a thumbs up to Lucien through the window. David arrived at precisely 0800 hours. He presented as nervous. Deals. Evidenced by repeated adjustments of his tie and a convulsive grip on his briefcase. Deals. Upon registering Era's presence, a flicker of surprise crossed his features. Mrs. Morel, he began. I was not aware you were to be a participant. I am serving as a consultant on the architectural elements, Era stated without affect. Deals. Lucien believed my input could prove valuable. Of course. David took a seat opposite Lucien's desk. So what is the agenda? Lucien displayed a presentation on his monitor. The Lexington Project. My intention is to expand the scope. Deals. Annexing 2 adjacent properties. The goal is a full block development. This deviates from the original proposal. I am aware, but the opportunity exists. I require you to run preliminary projections. Acquisition costs, development timeline. Deals. Projected return on investment. David's eyes darted between Lucien and Era. This constitutes a significant expansion. Deals. It will require weeks to formulate accurate estimates. I require preliminary figures by Friday. Friday, Lucien. Is there an issue? No issue. It's just, I will need to collate a large volume of data. Deals. Access certain files. Whatever you require. I am authorizing full access to the property database. A micro-expression shifted across David's face, too rapid for casual observation, but Era registered it. Relief, or perhaps anticipation. Deals. I'll begin immediately, David said. Following his departure, Lucien looked to Marcus through the glass partition. Marcus held up his phone and nodded. He initiated a call. Marcus reported via the intercom. Encrypted line. Deals. The content was indecipherable, but the duration was 43 sepient. Era asked. Analysis is ongoing. However, his use of a burner phone indicates a clear intent to evade traceability. Deals. Lucien's expression became affectless. We have him. Marcus raised a hand. We have documented suspicious behavior. We do not yet possess proof of any illegal act. Then we will acquire proof. Deals. The remainder of the day was dedicated to monitoring David's digital activity. He accessed the property database as authorized, but he also penetrated files for which he had no operational justification. Deals. security protocols for unrelated developments, financial records from long-dormant projects, all copied to an external drive. He is gathering ordnance, Era observed, reviewing the access logs, or constructing a narrative, Lucian corrected, Yields. In a takeover scenario, leverage is paramount, evidence of mismanagement, financial irregularities, anything to challenge existing leadership. But no such mismanagement exists. Your operation of this company is flawless, Yields. That does not preclude the fabrication of evidence, Yields. That evening, Marcus delivered his report. David had placed 3 additional calls on the encrypted line. He attended a lunch meeting with an unidentified individual at a restaurant in Midtown, Eels. Marcus had photographic evidence but was unable to get within auditory range. Further, he had sent an email from a private account with an attached cryptically labeled L project files. Can you trace the email's destination? Lucian asked. Eels. Still in process. What I can confirm is that the recipient does not exist within your corporate directory, an external contact, or an internal one using a private email to remain off-system. Ira examined the photographs from David's lunch meeting, Eels. The other subject was male, mid-50s, wearing a high-end suit. She did not recognize him. Eels. Magnify the facial features, she instructed. Marcus complied. The image was grainy but sufficiently resolved. That is Richard Gao, Lucian stated. His voice was devoid of inflection, a state of extreme control. He is a corporate litigator, Eels. His specialty is hostile takeovers, Marcus uttered. This is not simply theft, Ira analyzed. This is a coup. Lucian stood, commencing a slow pace toward the window. The cityscape spread below, Eels, its lights beginning to activate as dusk settled. They are planning a forced removal. They will use the irregularities they themselves have engineered as evidence of my mismanagement, attack my competency, and compel a board vote, Eels. Is that a viable strategy? Era asked. With adequate support, yes. The board possesses the authority to remove leadership should they deem it to be in the company's best interest. Eels. Who constitutes the board? 7 members. My mother, Gerald Chen, 3 independent directors, and 2 family representatives. Adrian, Lucian confirmed with a nod, and my uncle Thomas. What is your uncle's position? Eels. He aligns with the dominant faction. Marcus moved a chair forward. Here is the current assessment. David Morrison and Gerald Chen are co-conspirators, potentially with external legal counsel from Richard Gao. They are assembling a case against you, Eels, compiling evidence of mismanagement and financial discrepancy, evidence that is likely fabricated. They require board support for your ousting, which translates to a requirement of 4 votes. Adrian makes 3, Lucian calculated. Gerald, David, Eels, and my brother. My mother would not vote against me. Eels. Era noted. Do not assume that. She has been advocating for Adrian to assume greater control. If the narrative is framed correctly, if I am presented as a liability to the company, she might align with them to preserve the business. That's pathological, Eels. That's family. Era's phone vibrated. She observed the screen and her posture became rigid. What is it? Lucian asked. She displayed the screen to him, a text message from an unknown number. You should ask your husband about the Coastal Holdings deal, Eels. Certain things are not as they appear. Coastal Holdings. Era looked at Lucian. What is that? The color had drained from his face. It was a development project I was involved in 5 years ago. It failed. Why? The financing collapsed. Eels. The investors withdrew at the 11th hour. Marcus was already at his keyboard. I am accessing the file now. Eels. There's no point. The subject, Lucian, accurately predicted the opposition's strategy. I know their claim, that I bungled the deal, costing the company millions. When questioned on the veracity of this, he denied it, Eels, citing an inability to produce exculpatory evidence. Key documentation, he noted, had been lost during a server migration. Convenient, Era observed, very. Subject Marcus, however, recovered a partial file. He also unearthed a secondary document, Eels, an internal investigative report. It was dated 4 months subsequent to the Coastal deal's failure and recommended disciplinary action against Lucian for financial negligence. This was never filed, Marcus stated, Eels. It's just sitting in an archived folder. Someone drafted it but never submitted it to the board, Eels. Who was the author? Era inquired. Marcus located the name Gerald Chen. He has been constructing this psychological operation for 5 years, Lucian concluded, awaiting the opportune moment. The moment of your marriage, Era added softly, Eels. That was the precipitating event, wasn't it? Your union with me, disrupting the planned union with Adrian. The original arrangement was designed to solidify Adrian's position, to lend him credibility. But you removed that possibility, she stated. Feels. Lucian observed her. You believe this is a result of our alliance? I believe our alliance accelerated their timetable. They had a plan, but we triggered a premature execution. A new message appeared on Era's device. If you care about him, Feels, you'll convince him to step down quietly. Otherwise, this gets ugly for both of you. Feels. She presented the communication to Lucian, his jaw muscles tensed. They are now extending the threat to you, he observed. Let them. Era, no. She rose to face him directly. I refuse to retreat. I have spent my entire existence as the safe option. Feels. The one who avoids conflict. That pattern ends now, Marcus interjected with a cough. A countermove is required. Threatening her indicates they are preparing to act. Agreed, Lucian said. We forced their hand. Now we will make them reveal it. How? Feels. Era asked. Lucian retrieved his phone and initiated a call. Mother, I require an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Margot's sharp inquiries were audible through the receiver. Because, Lucian stated, I am removing Gerald Chen as CFO. Feels. And I'm recommending David Morrison for termination. Margot's retort was of sufficient volume to make Marcus flinch. I possess evidence of financial misconduct, Lucian continued, his tone clinical. And if you wish to protect this company, Feels, you will support me. I will transmit the preliminary findings tonight. He terminated the call. A bold gambit, Marcus noted. It is the only logical move, Lucian replied. We force them into the open, compel them to defend their position publicly. Feels. They either possess the support to challenge me or they will collapse. And if they challenge, Era asked, then we engage. The board meeting was set for 9 a.m. Era dedicated the night to compiling documentation, every anomalous transfer, Feels, every property alteration, every fragment of evidence they had gathered, Feels. She structured the data into a presentation designed to be irrefutable, even by a hostile audience. Lucian collaborated with legal counsel, formalizing the charges against Gerald and David. Marcus coordinated with external investigators, Feels, prepared to freeze assets on command. At 3 a.m., Era discovered Lucian in his office, fixated on his computer monitor. You require rest, she advised. Impossible. She occupied the chair opposite him. You will prevail tomorrow. Feels. You can't be certain of that. I am. Because your position is righteous and theirs is not. And that is a determining factor, he asked. In my entire career, I have witnessed righteousness lose to politics. Feels. Then we ensure politics does not win this time. He looked at her then, a deep analytical gaze. Feels. Why are you undertaking this? He asked. You could disengage. This is not your conflict. Yes, it is. I am your wife, correct? That fact makes it my conflict. That was a business arrangement, was it? Era tilted her head. Feels. Because at some point in the last month, it began to feel like something more. Lucian became perfectly still. Era, I am not making a demand, she interjected quickly. I am simply stating my position. I am here. Regardless of tomorrow's outcome, Feels. I am here. He stood, circling the desk. For a moment, she anticipated he might initiate a kiss, a genuine one, not the performative gesture from their wedding. Instead, he took her hand. Thank you. The acknowledgement was sufficient. Feels. The boardroom the following morning had the clinical tension of a surgical theater. Feels. 7 individuals occupied seats around a monolithic table. Margot presided at its head, with Gerald and Adrian on one flank and 3 independent directors on the other. David Morrison was positioned against the wall. Feels. A non-voting observer present as VP of Operations. Lucian and Era sat as a unit. Marcus was stationed in an adjacent room on standby. Let us begin, Margot announced, her voice like ice. Lucian, you called this emergency meeting. Feels. You have the floor. Lucian stood and activated the presentation. For the next 30 minutes, he systematically detailed the case, the anomalous transfers, the property modifications, Gerald's role in authorizing illicit transactions, Feels, and David's complicity in their execution. Feels. He presented documentation, chronological charts, and financial records. He connected every data point, constructing an unassailable argument. Throughout the presentation, Gerald remained immobile, his expression a neutral mask. Feels. When Lucian concluded, the room was silent. Then Gerald rose. May I offer a response, he asked. Margot inclined her head. Everything Lucian has just presented to you is factually accurate, Gerald stated. The transactions occurred. Feels. The modifications were implemented. I authorized them. The room filled with sudden noise. An independent director demanded an explanation. Adrian appeared genuinely stunned. Gerald raised a hand for silence. Feels. I authorized them because Lucian ordered me to. Lucian's composure remained intact. That is a fabrication, is it? Gerald produced his own tablet. Eels. I have emails, voice recordings, and documents demonstrating that every single transaction was executed at your direct command. He projected the files onto the screen. They were all there. Emails originating from Lucian's account, Eels, voicemails that mimicked his vocal patterns, all instructing Gerald to perform the exact transfers under scrutiny. Era experienced visceral, sinking feeling. The evidence was forged. It had to be, but its verisimilitude was chilling. Eels. This is fabricated, Lucian stated flatly. Prove it, Gerald countered calmly. Margot turned to her son. Lucian, did you authorize these transactions? No. Then how do you account for this documentation? Someone is orchestrating a frame-up. Eels, that is not my voice. Those are not my emails. Eels. They originated from your account, Gerald said. Your IP address, your vocal patterns. Adrian stood. I believe we must suspend Lucian pending a full investigation. Seconded, independent director said. Margot's face was impassive. Eels. All in favor? 3 hands rose. Gerald, Adrian, and 1 independent. Opposed? 2 hands. Margot and another independent. The 3rd independent director wavered. I abstain until more information is available. Margot closed her eyes briefly. Eels. The motion fails. 4 votes are required. Adrian struck the table with his palm. This is absurd. The evidence is right there. The evidence is questionable, Margot stated. Eels. And I will not destroy my son's career based on it. Era stood. Every gaze in the room shifted to her. If I may, she began. You are not a member of the board, Gerald interjected. No, but I am the architect who first identified the irregularities. Eels. And I have material you need to see. She launched her own presentation, illustrating the pattern of modifications, the timeline, and how the fraudulent activity escalated after specific events. These alterations were not random, she explained. Eels. They were strategic. Someone was building the infrastructure for a corporate takeover, and that individual required Lucian's removal to succeed. She displayed David's encrypted call logs, his meeting with Richard Gow, Eels, the emails to unidentified parties. David Morrison has been coordinating with outside legal counsel specializing in hostile takeovers. Eels. And Gerald Chen has been manufacturing evidence to support a case against Lucian, Era concluded. This isn't mismanagement. This is a planned coup. David shot to his feet. This is insane. I don't. His phone rang. The burner phone. Eels. He had neglected to deactivate it. All eyes were on him. Answer it, Lucian said quietly. David's face lost all color. It's nothing. Answer it on speaker. Marcus entered the room holding his own phone. Or I can identify the caller for you, Eels, as I've been tracing that number. It belongs to Adrian Morel. The room erupted into chaos. Adrian's face was ashen. He glanced at David, at the still ringing phone in David's hand, and then at the board members staring at him. Eels. This is preposterous, he stammered. Why would I be calling David right now? An excellent question, Marcus said. He had positioned himself by the door, blocking any exit. Perhaps because you are experiencing a panic response, Eels. Perhaps because your entire strategy has just collapsed. I have no knowledge of what you are talking about, Adrian insisted. Lucian rose slowly from his chair. Answer the phone, David. David's hand trembled. Eels. The phone continued its insistent ringing. Answer it, Lucian repeated, his voice leaving no room for refusal. Or I will. David jabbed the answer button but failed to activate the speaker. Not a good time, he muttered into the device. Eels. Everyone could hear the frantic, crackling sound of Adrian's voice. David's eyes widened in horror. He hung up. Too late. Get Adrian's phone records, one of the independent directors ordered. Now. Eels. Margot was staring at her younger son with an expression of profound disbelief, as if seeing a complete stranger. Adrienne, what have you done? Nothing. This is a setup. Your voice was on that call, the director stated. We all heard it. So what? Eels. David works for me. I call him frequently. Regarding what? Era asked. She remained standing, her hands braced on the table. What, specifically, were you calling him about at this precise moment? Eels. During a board meeting where your brother stands accused of fraud. Adrian's mouth opened, then closed. He had no response. Gerald stood up. I'd like to request a recess. Clearly, there are accusations being made that require further investigation. Eels. Sit down, Margot commanded. Her voice was sharp enough to cut steel. Eels. No one is authorized to leave until we have a conclusive assessment. Marcus produced a laptop, interfacing it with the main display. I have conducted surveillance of all relevant communications for the preceding 72 hours. This was Fields, of course, with proper authorization. A brief nod was directed at Lucien. The findings are as follows. The screen populated with a data visualization of call records, emails, and text messages. A clear network of collusion between Adrian, David, Fields, Gerald, and Richard Gall. The language was coded. Discussions of neutralizing obstacles, consolidating power. The final phase. This pattern began 18 months ago, Marcus stated, Fields. Correlating with the period Adrian initiated his campaign to have Lucien removed from active leadership. The subject Adrian began to show signs of diaphoresis. This is all taken out of context. Marcus proceeded, this, however, Fields, is my primary exhibit. Fields. An email was isolated on the screen. The sender was Adrian, the recipient David, dated 6 weeks prior. Once L is bound to Era through marriage, he enters a state of maximum vulnerability. She represents the ideal pressure point. Fields. We execute the plan post-ceremony. A profound auditory void filled the room. The subject Era exhibited a physiological response consistent with a sharp psychological blow. This was premeditated. The perpetrators had factored in the engagement, Fields, depended on it, structuring their entire strategy around weaponizing her against Lucien. You absolute son of a... Lucien's vocalization was low, controlled. Adrian rose. You lack the capacity to understand. For years, Fields, you've operated this company as a personal fiefdom, making unilateral decisions, excluding me from critical operations because of your own incompetence. I am your brother, he added. Lucien's response was glacially cold. You are a liability, Fields. Controlled, he continued. Every action, every strategic decision I have undertaken was to insulate this company from your errors. And your response, rather than gratitude, was to orchestrate a betrayal, Fields. Adrian's carefully constructed composure disintegrated. Father granted us equal control, yet for 10 years you've relegated me to the role of an assistant. Have you any concept of that experience? To be secondary to you in every conceivable arena, Fields. Then your work ethic should have been superior. My work ethic was relentless. I brought David into the fold. I nurtured relationships. I forged the necessary alliances. You engaged in felony fraud. Adrian's jaw muscles tensed, Fields. I did what was required. Margot stood, her appearance suddenly aged, fatigued. Gerald, were you a party to this? Gerald meticulously adjusted his necktie. Fields. My actions were based on my professional assessment of the company's best interests. That is not a direct answer. Yes. His tone was devoid of inflection. I was a participant. Fields. Adrian presented his concerns regarding Lucien's management paradigm to me 2 years ago. We reached a consensus that a change in leadership was imperative. By fabricating evidence to frame my son for crimes he did not commit, Fields. By documenting a behavioral pattern where personal ego was prioritized over corporate welfare. That's pathology, Era stated. All eyes turned to her. I have spent the last month conducting a forensic review of property files. Fields. Every single decision Lucien executed was strategically sound. The only anomalous transactions were the ones you engineered. Your objectivity is compromised, Gerald retorted. You are his spouse, Fields. I am an architect with 15 years of documented experience and a reputation that predates my association with him, Fields. Do not attempt to invalidate my analysis because it is inconvenient to your narrative. An independent director leaned in. I require access to all materials. Every document, every communication log, every piece of presented evidence, Fields. This body will not proceed with a vote until a complete picture is established. I concur, another added. Margot's focus returned to Adrian. You are suspended. The suspension is effective immediately. You will relinquish all company access. Fields. Passwords and authorization codes. Mother, you conspired against your own brother. You committed corporate espionage. You are fortunate that I am not involving law enforcement at this juncture. This is irrational. Fields. I was attempting to save the company. You were attempting to seize it. A slight tremor entered Margot's voice. Leave. Fields. Adrian fixated first on her, then on Lucien. Yes, Lucien stated. It is. Security personnel escorted Adrian from the premises. Gerald followed, his termination not yet official but implied. David attempted a discreet exit, Fields, but Marcus intercepted him. We require a formal statement, Marcus said. Full cooperation will be met with prosecutorial consideration. The alternative is a criminal referral. David assessed the board, Lucien, and Era. He acquiesced with a nod. Fields. The meeting was formally adjourned. Era felt a somatic release, as if she'd been in a state of respiratory arrest for an hour. Are you stable? Lucien asked softly. The assessment is pending. They returned to his office. Margot followed, heels, securing the door behind them. I must offer an apology, she said. Lucien observed his mother. Heels. For what specific failure? For a failure of observation, for compelling you to integrate Adrian. I was an enabler of this pathology. You had no way of knowing. I should have, Margot sat, the movement heavy. Heels. He is my son. I should have recognized his capacity for this behavior. He is rageful, Lucien observed. His anger has always been diffuse, at father, at me, at his perceived station in the world. This outcome was inevitable. Heels. Margot's gaze shifted to Era. And you, I owe you an apology as well. For what? Era inquired. For my initial assessment of you as another of Adrian's maladaptive attachments. For failing to welcome you to this family system with the proper decorum. Heels. She paused. You preserved my company today. That is an act I will not fail to register. My motivation was not the company, Era said. Heels. My motivation was him. A subtle shift occurred in Margot's expression. That is evident. After she departed, Era collapsed into a chair, her hands exhibiting tremors from the residual adrenaline. That was a terrifying ordeal, she stated. Heels. Your outward presentation did not indicate terror. I am a skilled actress. Lucien knelt before her, taking her hands. You were remarkable. The methodical presentation of the evidence, your direct confrontation of Gerald. Heels. I was operating from a state of intense anger. They attempted to use me as a tool against you. They actually believed I would be a compliant instrument. She could not complete the thought. I am aware, and Adrian, he engineered the entire sequence. Heels. The affair with Cleo, the engagement crisis, all of it. Perhaps not the affair, Lucien mused. That was likely just Adrian's baseline behavior. Heels. But everything that followed, yes. He identified an opportunity and exploited it. Era looked at their intertwined hands. That email Marcus displayed about me being a pressure point. Their intent was to threaten me, wasn't it? Heels. To coerce you into resigning. That is the probable scenario. What would your response have been? He met her gaze. I cannot be certain. I am simply relieved we did not have to run that simulation. Her phone vibrated. She retrieved it. Heels. A text message from Cleo. Can we talk? Showed the screen to Lucien. He frowned. You have no obligation to respond. I know. Yet a diagnostic curiosity lingered. She typed a reply. Regarding what? The response was immediate. Heels. I know what Adrian did. I'm sorry. Era stared at the message, then typed, to which part of your behavior does this apology apply? Cohabitating with him or failing to warn me of his plot to destroy my husband. Heels. 3 dots materialized, vanished, then returned, finally. Both. Can I see you? No. She blocked the contact's number. That was a cold response, Lucien noted. I am learning from the foremost expert. He almost smiled. Heels. The subsequent week was a period of systemic chaos. David provided a full statement to investigators, implicating both Adrian and Gerald in the fraud conspiracy. Gerald retained legal counsel and refused to cooperate. Adrian vanished, Heels, leaving the city entirely, according to his assistant. The board voted to remove Gerald as CFO and terminate his contract. They rescinded all of Adrian's operational authority, Heels, though removing him as a shareholder would require a protracted legal conflict. Lucien was indifferent. So long as his brother was stripped of power, the shares were irrelevant. Heels. The press entered a feeding frenzy. The narrative contained all the elements they favor. Familial psychodrama, corporate conspiracy, fratricide. Era's identity was enmeshed in the story. The architect who exposed the conspiracy. Heels. The new wife who rescued her husband's corporation. Her phone rang incessantly. Reporters, former associates, clients all demanding to know if her professional practice was still active, or if she had been subsumed by the Morel empire. Heels. My professional identity remains intact, she informed one persistent architecture journalist. I am still accepting projects. My marital status has no bearing on my career, but you are now employed by Morel Industries. Heels. I am consulting on a single project that is not synonymous with employment. The prevailing narrative is that the contract was a result of your husband's influence. Era's jaw tightened. Heels. People are free to construct any narrative they choose. My portfolio speaks for itself. She terminated the call, and another immediately came through. It was her former superior, Michael. Era, we need to discuss the Riverside project. Heels. Her stomach constricted in a classic anxiety response. Riverside was a high-stakes client, a museum renovation she had personally managed for 8 months. What about it? The board has expressed concerns about the optics. Heels. Optics related to my husband's company, which have zero correlation with my professional duties. I understand, but they are wary of the association, of the public perception of you as lead architect when you're married to. Feels. When I am married to a man who just exposed high-level corporate fraud within his own family's company. Feels. That fact should increase my credibility, not diminish it. Ira, are they removing me from the project? A pause. Michael, are they removing me from the project? They wish to reassign it, to install a new lead. Feels. You can remain attached as a senior consultant. No. Ira, be rational. I said no. I have invested 8 months in Riverstone Society. I have an encyclopedic knowledge of that structure. If they require a different lead, they can find a new firm. Feels. You cannot issue ultimatums of that nature. Observe me. She disconnected the call, threw the phone across the room. It impacted the wall, but did not shatter. A disappointing outcome as she desired at a destructive release. Feels. Lucien materialized in the doorway. What has occurred? I am being professionally penalized as a direct result of my association with you. Feels. By whom? My firm? The Riverside client? Everyone. She began to pace, the psychomotor agitation too strong to remain stationary. I am being punished for being your spouse, for being competent at my job, for presenting factual evidence in that boardroom. Feels. Era, do not tell me it will be fine, or that it is inconsequential. It is consequential to me. He entered the room, intercepting her pacing. I was not going to say that. I was going to say that your assessment is correct. Feels. It is unfair and it is misogynistic, and your anger is a completely rational response. Her rage subsided slightly. Oh, but you are also incorrect on one point. You are not being punished for being married to me. Feels. You are being punished because you are a woman who refuses to be minimized. Feels. This is the mechanism that terrifies them. It is not an instrument of comfort. It was never meant to be. It is designed to reflect a clinical truth. The subject, Lucien, established physical contact. His prognosis followed. You will re-engage Michael. Feels. Your ultimatum will be that Riverside remains under your purview, or you will sever the professional relationship. If his response is suboptimal, you will establish a competing entity. I lack the resources for that. A fallacious assessment. Feels. You possess the required assets. He then presented his own device as evidence. I have a list of 15 developers prepared to retain your services immediately. You have the reputation, the skill set, and now the requisite name recognition. Feels. You must leverage it. I refuse to exploit your network. That is your decision. Feels. But do not operate under the delusion that you lack alternatives. The subject era observed him. You believe this is a viable course of action? My assessment indicates a high probability of success. She reinitiated contact with Michael. Feels. Delivering the ultimatum precisely as formulated by Lucien. Michael attempted de-escalation, seeking a compromise. Era remained steadfast. Lead architect, or I withdraw. She stated, the decision window is 24 hours. Feels. Michael responded within 3. You retain the lead on Riverside. The board has conceded. Excellent. However, Era, this act has significantly depleted your social capital. Feels. Continued employment here requires a demonstration of collaborative behavior. I am a collaborator. That is precisely why I am claiming the position I have earned. She terminated the call. Feels. Experiencing the classic cognitive dissonance of simultaneous victory and terror. That evening, she and Lucien consumed a meal at the residence. Feels. A prepared meal, not a delivery. Feels. He had arranged for provisions and was in the process of preparing pasta. Your culinary skills were previously undocumented, Era noted, observing him from a distance. I possess none, but I can execute a sequence of instructions. Feels. He indicated a tablet displaying a recipe. It is, fundamentally, applied chemistry. That is the exact statement of an individual unskilled in cooking. The pasta proved adequate. They ate at the kitchen island. Feels. Their dialogue deliberately avoiding the recent traumas related to work and family. Present a piece of data about yourself that I do not currently possess, Lucien said, such as anything, something authentic. Era considered this. Feels. My initial vocational goal was painting prior to architecture. Feels. I attended art school for 2 years before concluding I had a talent for technical schematics, but a profound deficit in genuine artistic expression. That is not a deficit. It is a specialization. My instructor claimed my work lacked a soul. Feels. Your instructor was incompetent. She produced a smile. And you? What data point is unknown to me? Lucien paused for a moment. Had a plan for extraction. Prior to this, before the board and the inquiry, I was preparing to abdicate my position. What? Feels. The timeline? Approximately 6 months from now. The plan was to transfer control to Adrian, permit him to orchestrate its collapse and withdraw completely. So why did you engage so fiercely to remain? He met her gaze. Because of your presence. Feels. Because withdrawal meant abandoning you to the consequences, a course of action I found untenable. A somatic tightening occurred in her chest. Lucian, I am making no demands, he added quickly. Feels. I am simply providing you with the truth. You initiated the inquiry. They concluded their meal in a silence distinct from their established pattern of comfortable quiet. This was charged, heavy with unspoken psychological data. Feels. I am going to engage in work for a period, Era stated, rising. I must review schematics. Era, it is acceptable. I require a focus on something normative. She retreated to her room, arranged blueprints on her desk, Feels, and attempted immersion in measurements and structural analyses. Yet her focus consistently reverted to the kitchen, to Lucian's statement. He had fought for the corporation due to her presence. Not from desire, Feels, but because leaving was synonymous with abandoning her. She did not know how to process this information. Feels. At approximately midnight, her phone activated, an unknown number. She considered ignoring it, but an impulse compelled her to answer. Era Vance, a female voice, professional tone. The name is Era Morel now. Of course, my error. Feels. This is Catherine Reeves from the Architectural Licensing Board. I am calling in reference to a complaint we have received, a visceral fear response initiated in Era's abdomen. What is the nature of the complaint? Feels. It pertains to your work on the Lexington project. The complainant alleges you have been disseminating confidential client data and utilizing your status as Mrs. Morel to secure an unfair competitive advantage. That is a complete fabrication. Feels. I have no doubt, but we are mandated to investigate all such claims. I will require your presence for a formal interview. Feels. Please bring all relevant documentation, contracts, communications, work product. Who is the source of this complaint? I am not at liberty to disclose that information pending completion of the investigation, but Era had already deduced the source. Feels. Adrian. This was his retaliatory action. After terminating the call, she remained in the dark, attempting to regulate her breathing against the rising panic. The attack was now focused on her career. Not a demotion or a reassignment, Feels, but a direct attempt to annihilate her professional standing. She walked to Lucian's office. The door was ajar, the light active. He was at his desk, observing his monitor. A formal complaint has been filed against me, she said. Feels, with the licensing board. He looked up. Feels. By whom? The source is not officially confirmed, but it is Adrian. It must be. Lucian's expression became dark. What is the specific allegation? She relayed the details, observing his features grow colder with each word. That bastard, Feels, he stated quietly. He can no longer directly impact me, so he is targeting you. What is the correct protocol? You resist it. You document all variables. You secure legal counsel, and you demonstrate the claim is without merit, he stood. Feels. And I will ensure Adrian develops a deep sense of regret for initiating this. How? I retain significant leverage, board positions, shareholder influence, access to family trusts. He wants to engage in asymmetric warfare. I will bury him, Lucian. No. Feels. I do not want you to compromise your own position for my sake. Too late. I am already compromised. He moved toward her. Feels. You stood in that boardroom and defended my position when I was a near stranger to you. You have invested weeks assisting me in a conflict that was not yours. This is the minimum reciprocal action. This is my career, and you are my wife. Feels. This means your conflict is now my conflict. The words remain suspended between them. Your wife. Not a partner in a transactional arrangement. Not a strategic ally. His wife. Lucian, she said, her voice soft. He kissed her. Feels. This was not the sterile press of lips from their ceremony. It was genuine, deep, desperate. His hands framed her face, fingers threading into her hair. She emitted a sound. Was it surprise or was it capitulation? She was uncertain, Feels, and she reciprocated the kiss. They moved backward until she made contact with the desk. Feels. His hands located her waist, lifting her onto its surface. She encircled him with her legs, pulling him closer. Months of accumulated tension and strategic distance finally ruptured. This is ill-advised, she verbalized against his mouth. Feels. I am aware. This introduces numerous complications. It is of no consequence to me, nor to her, not in that moment. Not with his hands on her skin, his breathing labored. The tightly maintained control he always exhibited was finally failing. Feels. They reached his bedroom. Clothing was discarded between kisses and vocalizations that could have been names or promises or merely autonomic sounds. The environment was heat and urgency, and the catharsis of ceasing all pretense. Afterward, Feels, they lay entangled, respiration rates high. Era's head was on his chest, monitoring the deceleration of his heart rate. Heels. That event has now occurred, she stated. Affirmative. Are we scheduled to debrief on it? Do you wish to? In truth, she was ambivalent. To talk was to define it. To apply labels to a dynamic that felt too large and too fragile for words. Later, she said. Heels. We can debrief on this topic later. Okay. He drew her closer. She did not resist. Morning arrived too quickly. Era awoke in Lucian's bed to sunlight, his arms still around her waist. For a brief interval, she remained inert. Heels. Allowing herself to process the sensation of safety. Then reality reasserted itself. Adrian's retaliation. The unresolved crisis. Lucian stirred beside her. Are there regrets? She analyzed the data. No. You? No. So, Heels. What is the next action item? He sat up, running a hand through his hair. Now we address the complaint. Heels. I will contact our legal counsel, have them construct a defense, and I will manage Adrian. How? Delegate that to me. Era did not like the implication, but she lacked the energy for debate. They consumed coffee together, dressed, Heels, and prepared for another day of consequences. Before they exited the apartment, Lucian took her hand. We execute this as a single unit. As a unit, she concurred. Heels. The interview with the licensing board took place 3 days later. Era was accompanied by 2 lawyers, every contract she had ever executed with Morel Industries, Heels, and documents proving the firewall she had established between her marital and professional life. The investigator was methodical but impartial. She posed detailed questions about the Lexington project, Era's hiring process, Heels, and communication protocols. Heels. The complainant alleges you are the beneficiary of preferential treatment due to your association with Lucian Morel, the investigator stated. I have been retained for one project only, Era replied, at the standard market rate, Heels. I participated in the conventional bidding process. The sole variable is my marriage to the CEO, a fact I disclose at the earliest opportunity. And you do not perceive this as a conflict of interest? Heels. I perceive it as a relationship necessitating meticulous management, which is why I have maintained distinct financial accounts, separate professional counsel, and have documented every single project-related interaction. Heels. The investigator recorded notes. The complainant further alleges you have shared confidential data regarding competing bids. That is false. Heels. I have never been granted access to competing bids. I would refuse such access. It would compromise the integrity of my work. Can you substantiate that claim? Era's lawyer presented a file. Heels. Internal communications from Morel Industries, showing Mrs. Morel's explicit request for exclusion from bid analysis, supplemented by affidavits from 3 department heads, confirming she has maintained all appropriate professional boundaries. Heels. The interview concluded after 2 hours. At its end, Era was exhausted, yet felt she had mounted a competent defense. We will conclude our investigation and deliver a finding within 30 days, the investigator informed her. In the interim, Heels, you are permitted to continue your work. Era departed the facility feeling as if she had just undergone a trial. Heels. Lucien was in the vehicle, waiting. His query was immediate. How did it proceed? The subject heiress responded. I believe it was adequate. They presented as equitable. Good. He merged the car into the flow of traffic. Heels. I have intelligence to report. What classification? Adrian has rescinded the complaint. Heiress's physiological response was one of shock. The how was a foregone conclusion. I presented him with terms. He ceases all actions against you. In return, Heels. I will not contest his standing as a shareholder. He gets to retain his equity, his dividends, a place at familial gatherings, but his operational involvement is terminated, and his proximity to you is forbidden. He acquiesced after a period of Heels, structured negotiation. What manner of negotiation? Lucien's expression was devoid of warmth. The kind that leverages my possession of documented evidence for every illegal act he has committed over the last 5 years. Heels. Tax evasion, securities fraud, witness tampering. I informed him that the entire file would be submitted to federal authorities unless he withdrew. The subject labels this blackmail. He reframes it as protection. If he targets you again, Heels, I will dismantle his life. The logic is simple. A typical subject might display distress at such a statement. Eris, conversely, exhibited clear signs of relief, a classic trauma bond response. Thank you, she stated. Heels. A predictable acknowledgement of her protector's dominance. Do not thank me. The intervention was overdue. The return to the apartment was conducted in silence. Upon arrival, Eris collapsed onto the couch. A vacation is required, she announced. Heels. His response was immediate. Where is the desired location? Her criteria were telling, a place with no board meetings, no legal counsel, and zero family dysfunction. That is a significant request. Her laughter followed. A release of tension. Heels. Lucien sat beside her, drawing her into his physical space. Heels. We are going to be stable. You are aware of this, correct? A test of her compliance. Her question, are we, was a momentary flicker of doubt. Yes. We have weathered a corporate overthrow and your malevolent sister. Our resilience is proven. Then, Heels, a more significant inquiry. What of us? The query was delivered at a low volume, almost subconscious. Can we manage us? He shifted his posture to face her directly. What is your meaning? This began as a business contract. Heels. Her next words confirmed the shift. Her next words no longer that, is it? No, he confirmed. It is not. Then what is it? His response was a calculated withholding of definition. I am uncertain, Heels, but I wish to ascertain its nature. Eris leaned toward him, a physical display of capitulation. I as well. The new terms were then established. No more separate sleeping quarters. A confirmation. No longer pretending this is merely strategy. Heels, a final confirmation. Heels. He sealed the new contract with a kiss to her forehead. Good. They remained in that state for a considerable period, observing the city's descent into darkness, allowing a cessation of activity for the first time in weeks. Heels. Whatever the next phase held, they would confront it as a single unit. The licensing board cleared Eris 2 weeks later. It was a complete exoneration, with no findings of misconduct. Heels. A formal letter confirmed the complaint's withdrawal and the closure of the investigation. She had it framed and displayed in her office, not as a monument to victory, Heels, but as an artifact proving her survival against an attempt to professionally annihilate her. Work became her stabilization point in the subsequent weeks. The Lexington project entered full development, Heels, and Eris immersed herself in it with an intensity bordering on the pathological. A clear sublimation of trauma, she refined blueprints, liaised with contractors, and spent hours on site observing the physical manifestation of her plans. Heels. This was her creation earned through demonstrated skill, not through affiliation or transactional arrangement. Lucien noted the behavior. Heels. You are overexerting, he observed one evening when she returned at 9, fatigued and coated in concrete dust. A test of her motives. I am exerting myself to the precise degree necessary. His diagnosis was sharp. Heels. You are attempting to prove something. Perhaps I am. She discarded her bag and boots by the entrance. Is that inherently negative? No. But you have no need to prove anything to me. Her response was a declaration of agency. This is not for you. Heels. It is for myself. He would understand this impulse better than most. They had settled into a routine that mimicked normalcy over the past month. Shared mornings, divergent workdays, Heels. Evenings spent either in collaborative work or its deliberate avoidance. The pretense of separate sleeping arrangements had ceased. Heels. The pretense of this being a temporary strategic alliance was abandoned, but a formal definition of their relational status remained elusive. Heels. They had not engaged in a direct conversation about what they were to each other beyond the signed legal document. Eris rationalized this as acceptable. Definitions were not time-sensitive. They had time. Heels. This equilibrium was disrupted when Margot invited them to dinner. Family only, she had specified over the phone. You, Lucien, and myself. No hidden objectives, no business. I want to properly know my daughter-in-law. Eris consented, Heels. As a refusal would seem churlish, yet she experienced the entire drive to Margot's residence as if she were entering a meticulously set trap. The house was exactly as Eris had projected. Immense, impeccably designed, Heels, and emotionally sterile despite the opulent furnishings. Heels. Margot received them at the door, dressed in elegant black. Not a hair was out of place. Her smile was courteous but unrevealing. Eris, thank you for attending. Thank you for the invitation. Heels. They were seated for dinner in a room that could accommodate 20. Just the three of them occupied one end of a table of vast proportions. The cuisine was superb. The dialogue was guarded. How is the Lexington project progressing? Margot inquired. Heels. On schedule, we initiated excavation last week. Lucien speaks with great admiration of your work. I appreciate that. You should. My son is not liberal with his praise. Lucien directed a sharp glance at his mother. She disregarded it. Heels. I owe you an apology, Margot stated. A genuine one, not the superficial gesture I offered in Lucien's office. Heels. That isn't necessary. It is. For years, I drove my sons to compete, telling Adrien he needed to emulate Lucien, and telling Lucien he needed to be more accommodating of Adrian. I engineered the very environment that enabled what transpired. Feels. Lucien placed his fork down. Mother, this is not the time for this. Yes, it is. Margot fixed her gaze on Eris. You entered a family system that was already fractured, and instead of retreating when you saw the extent of the damage, you remained. Feels. You fought for us when we were undeserving. Eris's correction was precise. I fought for Lucien, not for the family, I know, and that is the reason for my gratitude. Margot paused. Adrian contacted me yesterday. Feels. The ambient temperature of the room seemed to decrease. What was his objective? Lucien's tone was flat, devoid of affect. To apologize. To me, to you, by proxy through me. He is in therapy, it seems, processing his issues. Good for him. Feels. Lucien's response was clipped. No, I do not wish to hear it. He rose from his seat. Adrian is not granted forgiveness simply because he is consulting a therapist. He attempted to destroy me. He attempted to destroy Eris. Feels. Apologies do not rectify that. I am not requesting you forgive him. I am requesting you entertain the possibility that individuals can change. When he has earned that consideration, we can discuss it. Lucien exited the room. Feels. Eris registered the sound of a door slamming elsewhere in the residence. Margot sighed. Feels. His anger is deeper than I estimated. Can you fault him for it? No, but retaining anger of that magnitude will eventually consume him. Eris reflected on her own anger. At Cleo, at Adrian, at all who had attempted to manipulate her. Feels. She had worn it for weeks as a form of protection. Was taxing. I will speak with him, Eris offered. Thank you. She located Lucien in what appeared to be his late father's study. Dark wood, leather furniture. Feels. Shelves filled with books that seemed untouched. He stood by a window, his focus on the manicured gardens outside. My apologies, he said without turning. My exit was inappropriate. You are permitted to be angry. Feels. My mother believes I am being irrational. Your mother desires the restoration of her family unit. Feels. That does not negate your rationale. He turned to face her. Do you believe I should forgive him, Adrian? Eris processed the query carefully. I believe you should pursue the course of action that allows you to achieve restful sleep. Feels. If that is forgiveness, so be it. If it is permanent disassociation, that is also a valid choice. And you? Have you forgiven Cleo? No. Do you intend to? The outcome is uncertain. Perhaps, eventually. Eris moved across the room to stand with him. Feels. But at present, my anger remains too potent, and I believe that is acceptable. My entire life has been spent placating those who caused me harm, because it is the expected protocol. Family, correct? One forgives family. Now, Feels. Now I believe forgiveness is earned, not an entitlement conferred by shared genetics. Feels. Lucien drew her close, pressing his forehead against hers, a nonverbal reinforcement. When did your insight become so profound? I married advantageously. It is having an effect. He kissed her, the contact unhurried and soft. Feels. They remained in that posture for a significant moment, holding one another in his dead father's study while his mother waited in the dining room. We should return, Eris said. Alternatively, we could depart. That would be discourteous. Feels. I am comfortable with discourtesy. They reached a compromise. They finished the meal, engaged in polite discourse, and left at a respectable time. In the car, Lucien took her hand. Thank you, he said. For what? For aligning with me. Feels. Even in situations of high complexity. Is that not the function of a marriage? Aligning with one's partner. I was under the impression our marriage was a strategic alliance. It was. Variables change. Feels. He smiled. Yes, they do. The Lexington project evolved into Eris's defining work. 6 months into the project, the structure was materializing precisely to her vision. Clean aesthetics, optimized natural light, feels, and a seamless flow between public and private spaces. Architectural publications began to inquire. Awards committees submitted nomination materials. You are going to achieve prominence, Lucien observed, examining the most recent rendering. Feels. I have no desire for prominence. I desire proficiency in my field. The two are not mutually exclusive. Fame introduces complications, as does marriage. You appear to be managing that variable well. She threw a rolled-up blueprint at him. Feels. He caught it laughing. Their dynamic was functional, not without flaws. Feels. They still engaged in conflict over trivial matters. There were still moments their fundamentally different operational styles created friction. But they were learning to decode each other. Feels. Determining how to integrate without losing their individual identities in the process. Eris established her own firm 6 months after the licensing board investigation concluded. The decision was driven by want, not necessity. Heels. She retained the Riverside project and 2 other clients who followed based on their trust in her work. Vance Architecture, Lucienne read from the business license. Not Morel. I earned the Vance name. Heels. I wish to maintain it in a professional capacity. Acceptable. She leased office space in a building 3 blocks from the Morel Industries headquarters. Heels. The new enterprise was initially small, the subject and 1 subordinate, but designed for scalability. On the first day of operations, standing within the empty office space amidst unassembled furniture and supplies, Heels. Era experienced a psychological state she had not reported in years, uncomplicated professional pride. The subject's partner, Lucian, arrived at midday with food and champagne, initiating a ritual of celebration. When questioned, he stated, Heels. Your first day as a business owner. That deserves champagne. Consumption occurred from disposable cups, a detail noted as perfect. Era then verbalized her anxiety, stating, I'm terrified. When asked for the source, Heels, she identified a fear of failure and of validating detractors who claimed her success was contingent on him. His response was a direct command, then don't fail. She dismissed this as unhelpful. He disagreed. Heels. He proceeded to offer positive reinforcement, citing her professional competence and work ethic as indicators of inevitable success, independent of his influence. He continued by reframing potential failure as a data point for future improvement. Heels. When she inquired about his newfound optimism, he attributed it to their marital bond. She initiated physical contact, a kiss, tasting of champagne, and what she termed possibility. 9 months post-board meeting, Heels. Contact was initiated by Adrian, not to Lucienne, but directly to Era. The electronic communication was brief, requesting a meeting while acknowledging he had no right to do so. Era presented the stimulus to Lucian, Heels, who deferred the decision to her but mandated his presence as a condition of her acceptance for security purposes. Heels. His stated objective was a private conversation. Her counter-objective was ensuring her physical safety. She consented to a meeting with Adrian at a public neutral location during standard business hours. Heels. Lucian positioned himself 3 tables away, within intervention distance but outside the immediate conversational sphere. Adrian's physical appearance had altered. He presented as thinner, with signs of fatigue. Heels. His grooming and attire were downgraded from expensive suits to casual wear. Thank you for meeting me, he began. She immediately established the parameters. I'm not here to forgive you. I know. I'm not asking for that. Heels. He exhibited self-soothing behavior, wrapping his hands around a coffee cup. I wanted to apologize for everything. For the affair with Cleo, for trying to use you against Lucienne, for filing that complaint, all of it. Her response was a single word. Heels. Okay. Heels. What do you want me to say, Adrian? That it's fine, that we're good now. Era created physical distance, leaning back. You tried to destroy my career because you couldn't destroy your brother. Heels. That's not something I can just forgive because you show up looking sad. I know, I'm not asking you to. His gaze dropped to his coffee. I'm in therapy. Real therapy. Not just saying it to make people feel better. Heels. He then identified the core of his pathology, a lifelong consuming anger at Lucian for perceived superiority in all domains. That's not his fault, he admitted. I know that now. Doesn't mean I knew it then. Adrian made eye contact. Heels. You were supposed to marry me. That was the plan. Our families agreed. Heels. You fit all the criteria. And I thought once we were married, I'd finally have something Lucian didn't. Her response was blunt. I'm not a trophy. No, but I treated you like one. And when you married him instead, it broke something in me. Heels. I couldn't stand that he got you when I was the one who proposed first. Era processed this confession, that the entire conflict was rooted in pathological sibling rivalry. Yeah, pretty pathetic, right? He asked. Pretty honest, she conceded. Heels. A period of silence followed. In the background, Lucian's expression remained non-reactive. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Era stated, but I appreciate the apology. That's more than I deserve, probably. Heels. A micro-expression resembling appeared on Adrian's face. Heels. He's good for you, Lucian. I can see it. When asked for evidence, he said, You're different, stronger. You stand up for yourself now. I've always stood up for myself. Not like this. When you were with me, you were quiet, accommodating. Heels. You let people walk over you. He paused. He taught you to fight back. No, she corrected. I taught myself. He just gave me a reason to. After Adrian's departure, Lucian moved to her table. How do you feel? He inquired. Heels. Her self-reported state was a mixture of weird, sad, relieved. When asked if she believed his claim about therapy, she stated, "I don't know, but I hope it's true. For his sake, not mine. Very generous of you. I'm trying to be less angry." Heels. It's exhausting being angry all the time. Lucian initiated physical contact, taking her hand. Heels. For what it's worth, I think you handled that perfectly. I didn't forgive him. I noticed. I approved. She exhibited a laugh. You're terrible. I'm protective. There's a difference. 6 weeks later, Cleo appeared at Era's office. Heels. The subject's arrival was unscheduled and unannounced, bypassing standard protocols. Era's assistant attempted to intervene, but Era took control of the situation. Cleo's physical state was poor: unkempt hair, infraorbital dark circles, heels, and slept-in clothing, a stark deviation from her previously well-groomed presentation. "What do you want?" Era asked. "To apologize." "Adrienne already did that. I'm not interested in collecting apologies from people who wronged me." Heels. "Please, just 5 minutes." Against her initial assessment, Era consented to a 5-minute interaction in her private office. Upon entering, Cleo surveyed the environment, the professional awards, Heels, the project photographs, all markers of Era's independent success. "You did this all yourself," Cleo observed. "Yes. I always knew you were talented. I just never thought you'd actually use it." When asked to clarify, Cleo stated, Heels, "You were always so careful, so risk-averse. You dated Adrian because he was safe, because it made sense on paper. I never thought you'd do something crazy like marry Lucienne. Marrying Lucienne was the best decision I ever made." "I know." Heels. "I can see that." Heels. Cleo then began to cry. "I ruined everything. My relationship with you, my relationship with Mom. Adrian won't even talk to me anymore. You slept with your sister's fiancé." "What did you expect?" Era asked. "I don't know." Heels. "I think I expected you to forgive me eventually because you always forgave me before." Era confronted this dynamic directly. "That's the problem, Cleo. I spent our entire lives forgiving you. Every time you took something from me," Heels, "every time you lied or manipulated or played the victim, I let it go because that's what family does." She then established a new boundary. "And now I'm done. I don't hate you, but I'm done being your safety net." Heels. Cleo wiped her eyes. "So that's it. We're just not sisters anymore. We'll always be sisters, but that doesn't mean I owe you my time or my forgiveness or my emotional energy." Era stood, terminating the interaction. "Your 5 minutes are up." Heels. "I hope you figure yourself out, Cleo, but I can't help you do that." Following Cleo's departure, Era remained in her office for a prolonged period, reporting a feeling of emptiness. The actual confrontation deviated from her rehearsed scenarios. Heels. She then initiated contact with Lucian. "Cleo came by," she reported. "Are you okay?" he asked. I told her I was done. Heels. "How did she take it?" She cried, but she left. "Good." After a pause, he offered his presence, which she declined, stating that hearing his voice was sufficient reinforcement. "I'm here always," he confirmed. "I know." Heels. The Lexington project garnered 3 significant industry awards. Era's professional visibility increased, leading to national interest. Her firm expanded from 1 assistant to 3, occupying a full floor. "You're building an empire," Heels, Lucian observed. "I'm building a career," she corrected. "Same thing, not even close." She preferentially hired young, female architects, mentoring them to counteract the systemic disadvantages she had faced. Heels. One mentee observed, "You're changing the industry." Era's response was, "I'm just doing what I'm good at." The subordinate disagreed, stating, "No, you're proving women can run successful firms without compromising or playing politics. That matters." Heels. Era began to reevaluate her role, recognizing she had become an aspirational figure for a new generation of architects. 1 year after their initial wedding, Lucian proposed a renewal of their vows. When she questioned the necessity, he replied, Heels, "Because the first time was strategic. I want to marry you again when it actually means something." Heels. "It meant something then," she argued. When he questioned this, she reflected on the initial ceremony, a clinical 11-minute procedure at City Hall. "It meant something different," she conceded, "but I'm not opposed to doing it again." Heels. The second event was small, involving only their core social network. Lucian's mother expressed emotional catharsis, stating, "I never thought I'd see my son happy." When asked, she clarified that he had previously been functional, successful, Heels, but happy. "No, you changed that." The ceremony was held at sunset with vows they authored themselves, departing from tradition. Heels. "I promise to be your partner," Lucian stated. "Not your handler, not your protector, not your decision-maker. You're equal in everything." "I promise to challenge you," Era responded. To call you out when you're being controlling, feels. To push back when you're wrong. To never let you manage me like a project. An observer, Margot, labeled this romantic, while her companion, Marcus, corrected it to honest. They exchanged simple, unadorned gold rings, feels, symbolizing practicality and permanence. The subsequent celebration was in stark contrast to their first engagement party. Surveying the gathering, Era experienced a state of psychological equilibrium she identified as contentment. Feels. It wasn't perfect happiness nor a storybook resolution, but a state of equilibrium with the reality she had constructed. Subject's thought process? Lucian inquired, observing her on the terrace. Contrasting this outcome with my initial projections. Feels. Better or worse? Different. I had projected that the marital bond would be defined by romantic gestures and heightened emotional displays. Instead, it is an exercise in joint enterprise, shared strategy, conflict, negotiation, feels, and a daily reaffirmation of the alliance. That sounds not. It is functional. He drew her into his proximity. I am attached to you. A pause. I believe that is my first verbal confirmation of the fact. It is, feels. My attachment is confirmed. Not for the corporate rescue or for your professional competence, feels, but because you provide a stimulus that makes me want to modify the cold, controlling behavioral patterns I exhibited prior to our association. You're still exhibiting controlling patterns, just with improved outcomes. Marginally. A brief laugh, feels, a kiss, and extraneous stimuli ceased to register. 2 years following their legal union, Morel Industries initiated a new program, a fund to provide capital and guidance to architects and designers from underrepresented demographics, feels. Lucian and Era presented it jointly. This is not philanthropy, Lucian stated. It is an investment in human assets and intellectual property in the future of the field. We are seeking architects who possess vision but lack access, feels, Era clarified. Individuals who have been systematically overlooked, individuals like I once was, feels. The fund was named in honor of Era's deceased father. She displayed a strong emotional response when Lucian informed her. That was not a required action, she said. It was. He was the primary catalyst for your development, feels. Such a contribution merits formal recognition. The fund became the primary focus of Era's professional energies. She personally vetted applications, interviewed finalists, and championed candidates who mirrored her own past profile, feels. Observing their success seemed to complete a psychological circuit she had not realized was incomplete. You are effecting a measurable change, Lucian observed one evening. That is the objective. No, you are achieving it, feels. Observe what you have constructed. Your firm, this fund, the individuals you are elevating. That constitutes a legacy. Our legacy. You created the conditions for this. We created them, jointly. He was factually correct, feels. Everything they had assembled, the corporation's stability, the architectural fund, their own complex marital structure, existed because they had chosen collaboration over opposition. This is the nature of such alliances, feels. They function only with mutual participation. 3 years in, Era received a communication from the licensing board, not a complaint, but an invitation, a seat on the ethics committee. That is a significant development, Lucian remarked, feels. It is also a significant time commitment. Then delegate. Your staff is competent. I am disinclined to delegate all tasks. I prefer direct involvement. Then determine your priorities and allocate your resources accordingly. Feels. You are not required to execute every task to perfection. Feels. This was a new variable. The previous iteration of Lucian would have optimized her schedule, implemented efficiency systems, and managed her time. This Lucian simply offered a strategic perspective and ceded the final decision to her. Feels. She accepted the appointment. This required a reduction in time spent on individual projects in favor of shaping policy and promoting systemic reform. A different application of her skills, but a necessary one. I am proud of you, Lucian stated, feels. For what? For transitioning from a subject who survives systems to one who alters them. That night, in a state of repose, Era processed the trajectory of her personal evolution, feels. From the woman who witnessed a partner's betrayal to her current status, a successful principal, an industry figurehead, and the partner of someone who accurately perceived her value, feels. In the absence of visual stimuli, subject Lucian initiated an inquiry. What is occupying your thoughts? Subject Yara's response presented a paradoxical reappraisal of a traumatic event, feels. How that engagement party was the optimal outcome for my life. A typical response to spousal infidelity is negative affect. Yara's is not. Most individuals are not bonded to you, Lucian observed. Is that a positive assessment? Feels. It is an objective statement. He then initiated physical contact, drawing her closer. I find satisfaction in your acceptance of my proposal, and I in yours. Would you repeat the action? Feels. Possessing full knowledge of the subsequent consequences. Yara's affirmation was immediate. Yes, unfailingly. The subject has successfully reframed a catastrophic personal failure as the foundational element of a superior outcome. Feels. The subject operates on the principle that systemic collapse is a necessary precondition for structural reinforcement. She catalogs her losses, a fiancé, a familial bond, a previous persona defined by risk aversion as acceptable costs. Feels. In their place, she has acquired a partnership predicated on full disclosure, a vocation validated by external metrics, and a reinforced sense of self-efficacy. This psychological trade-off is deemed highly valuable. 5 years post-nuptials, Feels. Yara observes a completed architectural structure. The Lexington project serves as a concrete manifestation of her reconstructed psyche. Lucian stands with her, their hands physically joined. It has achieved perfection, he states. Feels. Her response is a correction. It is not perfect. Feels. Observe the entrance canopy. The angle is fractionally off from my design. No other observer will ever detect it. I detect it. And that is the reason for your high level of competence. She leaned against him. Feels. Watching the building interact with the afternoon light. Do you ever run the simulation of what would have happened if I had married Adrian? Periodically. Feels. Usually when I am feeling a sense of gratitude for having avoided that particular catastrophic outcome. I would have been chronically dissatisfied. I likely would have resigned from the company and relocated to a low-stimulus environment. Feels. We both would have been accepting a suboptimal arrangement. Yes, but we did not. We chose a different path. That was the core variable, she realized. Choice. Every decision, Feels, from the impulsive proposal to combating the conspiracy to building their reality, had been a choice. Not a predetermined path, not destiny. Feels. Just two subjects determining their objectives and then executing the strategy to achieve them. I am attached to you, she said. I am aware of that. Is that it? That is the extent of your verbal response? I am also attached to you, obviously. Feels. He kissed her temple. But I operated under the assumption you were already aware of that. I was, but auditory confirmation is reinforcing. They remained there as the sun set, observing the building Era had designed fill with light and activity. Feels. 5 years ago, she had been a background element, the practical choice, the low-risk option, an individual easily dismissed. Now she was a dominant figure, not because she had allied with power or wealth or status, Feels, but because she had ceased allowing external agents to define her value. That was the real victory, not the accolades, or the successful enterprise, or the marriage that had stabilized into something functional.